Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I used to think there was a kind of safety in silence, that if you just kept moving forward, one dinner, one load of laundry, one lukewarm kiss at a time, you could outrun this sinking feeling that something was deeply wrong. I thought I could outwork the void in our marriage, like folding socks or making reservations at places with dim lighting and overpriced red wine could patch over whatever crack had started forming between us. But 20 years in, I sat across from Jack Caldwell in a steakhouse with white tablecloths and dimmed chandeliers, and I realized I hadn't outrun a damn thing. He looked sharp that night. Navy jacket, gold watch I bought him 2 birthdays ago, and a smug little smile like he'd already won a prize I didn't know we were competing for. We had just finished the second course, something with duck and figs I didn't really touch, when he leaned across the candlelight, close enough that his cologne hit before his words did. He looked me dead in the eye, calm as a priest at confession, and whispered, "You're just a placeholder until she's ready." I didn't flinch. Not outwardly. I kept my hands on the table, folded neatly like I was praying, and I nodded. Just nodded. Then I reached for my wine, swirled it like I cared about the aroma, and drained it in one long pull. He smirked, maybe expecting tears or a scene, but I just smiled back, small and tight, and sharp enough to cut glass. We finished dinner. That's the part that might surprise you. We stayed. We ordered dessert. I even laughed at one of his stupid jokes. I think it was about the waiter. And when the check came, I paid. Just like that. On our 20th anniversary. The same way I've paid for 100 other things he's taken for granted. He made some comment about owing me big time, and I nodded again like I agreed. I watched him eat his creme brulee like a man with no consequences waiting at home, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment I'll remember when I burn it all down. Because the truth is, I've known about her for a while. Not her name at first, but the shadow of her. The scent of vanilla lotion I never wore. The pause when his phone buzzed and he turned it face down like it was radioactive. The weekends away. The inside jokes I wasn't part of. I'm not stupid. I'm not blind. I'm just a woman who waited. And watched. And wrote everything down. There was a lipstick stain on the collar of his golf polo last spring. It was a shade I'd never wear, not with my skin tone. A deep wine red, cheap-looking, the kind you find at drugstores next to the nail glue. He lied, of course. Said it must have been from a waitress leaning in to clear plates. I didn't argue. Just made a mental note, then went to CVS the next day and bought that exact shade. Just to see. I still have the tube, tucked in the back of my drawer, untouched. The first real proof came 8 months ago. He left his work laptop open on the kitchen counter. Said he was heading to Lowe's, needed to pick up light bulbs. 20 minutes later, I sat down with a glass of Pinot and read every flagged email from a contact named ED. I remember laughing when I saw the initials, erectile dysfunction. No, just Emily Dorsey. An old flame from college. They reconnected at a reunion 2 years ago, apparently. The emails weren't filthy. That's the part that got me. They were emotional. Tender. The kind of words he hadn't said to me in over a decade. The kind of words that made me feel like I was reading someone else's love story. He told her he was almost out. That I was hanging on by threads, and it'll be clean soon, no drama. He said she was the real one. And that's when I started planning. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I took screenshots. Created folders. Talked to Lena, my best friend since we were kids, sneaking cigarettes behind the high school gym. She said, "Girl, play the long game. Win by outlasting. Win by knowing." And that's what I did. By the time he whispered that venom into my ear over dinner, I was already halfway to freedom. The papers were drawn up, waiting in my desk drawer. The accounts split and protected. The lawyer, a bulldog from Manhattan with eyes like a hawk and zero tolerance for bullshit. I had names, dates, timestamps. I knew about the condo in Connecticut he was planning to buy. I knew about the fake business trip to Denver next month, where she was flying in for a surprise weekend. I knew everything. So I finished the wine. I smiled. I told him I'd drive us home since he looked tired. On the way, he fell asleep in the passenger seat like a child who never imagined the woman beside him could be a storm waiting to happen. I drove slow. I wanted to remember every goddamn streetlight on that ride home. Wanted to burn the memory into my brain. And later, once he was snoring on the couch with a half-buttoned shirt and the TV still playing some rerun of Dateline, I tiptoed upstairs, opened my laptop, and clicked into the folder labeled Phase 1. Because revenge, my friend, isn't loud. It's not fireworks or screaming matches or tossing his shit on the lawn. Real revenge is quiet. Precise. A slow drip that finally breaks the pipe. And I had been dripping for 3 years. It didn't start with lipstick or perfume or even the long silences over dinner that used to be filled with dumb stories about coworkers or jokes that weren't funny but at least meant he was trying. No, it started on a Tuesday morning with a forgotten receipt stuck to the bottom of Jack's briefcase, crumpled and faint, but clear enough for me to read the name of a boutique hotel in Stamford. The kind with those tiny square pillows and complimentary robes they charge you for if you steal. He told me he was in Albany that night, some client dinner, and I hadn't questioned it because that's what 2 decades of habit does. It trains you to look away at just the right time. I remember holding that receipt in my hand like it was radioactive, like touching it might change something fundamental in my chest. And it did, just not the way I expected. That was 3 years ago, and that was the moment the old version of me, the one who cried into laundry piles and Googled how to fix your marriage when you're the only one trying, started to die. Not all at once. Slowly, methodically, like peeling wallpaper off a damp wall. You have to be careful or it tears unevenly, and I didn't want messy. I wanted clean. So I called Lena. Now Lena isn't the kind of woman you call when you want comfort. She's not going to cry with you or bring over wine and say things like men are just confused. Lena is the kind of woman who owns bolt cutters and has a laminated list of emergency contacts that includes a locksmith, an IT guy, and a divorce attorney named Sharon who doesn't blink unless it's to kill. When I told her what I found, she didn't ask how I felt. She asked what I wanted to do. And that's when we started the project. We called it the Real Estate File. I opened a fresh Gmail account under the name SC Holdings and used it to sign up for location alerts, hotel promo emails, anything Jack might have used while booking his trysts. Lena showed me how to clone metadata from PDFs, so if he ever sent anything sketchy from our shared devices, it would leave a digital footprint I could trace. I kept a physical journal too, dates, times, receipts, little scribbled notes like texted her at 2:17 a.m. or why did he take 2 phones to Chicago? I didn't confront him. I didn't even treat him any different. I became, in his eyes, the perfect wife, smiling, supportive, disinterested in the details. But I was watching everything. It's strange how quickly you can adapt to betrayal once you stop needing the person betraying you. That was the key, really. I didn't need him anymore. I'd spent years thinking that without Jack, I'd unravel. But over time I started to feel something new growing inside me, not hate, not exactly, but a kind of cold steel resolve that hummed in my bones and told me to keep going. Every morning, I'd put on mascara, fix him coffee, and kiss him goodbye like we were still a team. Then I'd sit down at my laptop and file another piece of evidence under Property A. By the time I found the emails, 35 of them in just 2 weeks. Wait, no, actually, 38. Damn it, math. I already had enough to bury him 6 different ways in court. I remember one email where she wrote, "It kills me to think of you waking up next to her," and he replied, "She's just a formality, baby. She's already gone. She just doesn't know it." That one was the hardest to read. Not because it hurt, but because it showed how easily he could erase me with words. Like I was furniture. Like I was a closing chapter in a story he already wrote an ending for. The first lawyer I saw was polite but useless. Talked more about Jack's career than mine, asked if I'd considered therapy. I left before he finished his coffee. Then Lena handed me Sharon's card. Sharon looked like someone's tired aunt, but asked for the folder before she even said hello. She went through every screenshot, every date, every login. Didn't say much until the end, when she tapped the last page and said, "You're going to come out ahead. He's sloppy. Let's just stay silent until we bleed him dry." I liked her immediately. So I started moving pieces. Quietly. I opened a bank account in my maiden name, had my paycheck rerouted without telling Jack. I stopped using our joint credit card and started saving every extra dollar. I talked to our accountant under the guise of planning for retirement and found out just how many business expenses were bullshit. Jack was building a second life, one receipt at a time, and I was going to take a sledgehammer to it. Lena joked once that I'd become the petty CIA, and I laughed harder than I had in months. Because it felt good, even righteous, to finally be the one pulling the strings. Every night I played my part, cooked dinner, asked about his day, let him lie straight to my face. Sometimes I wondered if he even believed his own stories anymore or if he just got high on how easy it was to fool me. Then came the Denver trip. He told me it was for a regional conference, real estate development, 3 days of panels and golf, and probably some dumb dinner with a keynote speaker who made a fortune flipping warehouses. I nodded, smiled, packed his bag for him, and slipped a tiny GPS tracker into the lining, just in case the hotel confirmation I already intercepted wasn't enough. He was meeting her. I knew it. She was flying in from Atlanta, where she worked some corporate job and lived in a condo Jack helped furnish. I had pictures of her balcony on file. As I waved him off that morning, he kissed my cheek like he was going to war, and I thought, "You're walking straight into it, Jack." And the worst part is, you still think I'm the fool. It's a strange thing, looking at someone you've loved for more than half your life and realizing that, to them, you've been nothing more than a piece of temporary furniture, functional, quietly in place, out of the way, but ultimately replaceable. That kind of awareness doesn't hit you like lightning. It creeps in through the corners of your mind, shows up in the way your name sounds in their mouth, or in the way they stop asking if you need anything from the store. It lands quietly and settles in your bones, and before you know it, you start living like you're just waiting to be dismissed. I spent too many years in that role, wife, mother, keeper of peace and plans and laundry cycles, thinking that my willingness to sacrifice would be the thing that made me indispensable. But being needed isn't the same as being loved. You can be used daily and never truly valued, and I learned that lesson the hard way, one meal, one favor, one "don't worry about me" at a time. I don't even know when exactly I stopped putting myself on the list, but it happened somewhere between our second kid and Jack's third promotion, when his travel increased and his excuses got slicker and more polished than his shoes. But this isn't a pity party. This is the moment where the lights come on backstage and you realize the entire play has been rewritten without your consent. Because as much as I hated what he whispered to me at that anniversary dinner, those 11 words that undid 20 years of shared history, I also recognized them. I recognized the casual cruelty in his voice because I'd heard it before. The first time I met Aubrey, I thought she was just another face in the crowd at one of Jack's charity events, all of them identical women in fitted dresses with perfect teeth and overplucked eyebrows, sipping rose and pretending to care about tax-deductible causes. She stood out, though, not because she was beautiful, although, yes, she was, but because she looked at Jack the way I used to. Eyes wide, like he was promising her the future instead of hiding his past. And she looked at me like she was taking notes. Polite. Cool. Distant enough to avoid suspicion, but warm enough to slip in under the radar. Her name didn't hit me right away. It sat in my brain like a loose screw, familiar but not urgent. Then I found the emails. Then I connected the dots. And then, finally, I remembered she was the girl who sent Jack a Christmas card 5 years ago, to the one that got away, scrawled in silver ink beneath a photo of her in a red dress, standing next to a dog that looked like a prop. He said she was just being sentimental. I didn't argue. I let it go. That was my mistake. One of many. I don't blame her. Not entirely. She believed his version of the story, where I was cold, distant, already halfway out the door. She believed he was stuck in a marriage that only existed on paper because that's what he fed her. That's what they always do, men like Jack. They don't just cheat on you physically, they cheat on your entire legacy together. They reduce everything you built into a story that suits their next chapter. But I'm not a chapter. I'm not a placeholder. I'm the goddamn author. The divorce papers were signed 2 weeks before our anniversary dinner. Every page stamped, every signature perfectly placed, every asset cataloged and claimed. I paid extra to have it expedited, and I used a notary who made house calls so Jack wouldn't notice anything missing. I kept the original copy locked in Lena's safe, but I printed one version just for me and slid it into the frame behind our wedding photo, the one he never notices anymore because it hangs in the hallway near the guest bathroom. Sometimes I stand in front of that frame with a glass of wine and imagine what it would be like if he accidentally saw it, if he happened to bump the frame and it tilted just enough to reveal the clean white edge of the legal document behind our smiling faces. I imagine his face, the slow understanding washing over it, and I imagine not saying a word, just letting the silence do the talking. When he got back from Denver, his skin smelled like hotel soap and recycled airplane air, and he had the audacity to kiss my forehead like everything was still in motion, like the train hadn't already derailed. I didn't ask about the trip. I didn't ask if she wore the necklace he bought on our credit card or if she liked the Chardonnay he charged to the room. I just handed him a glass of wine, my favorite vintage, which he always forgets the name of, and said, "Let's do dinner again tomorrow. Something tells me we'll have a guest." He blinked. Just once. Then nodded slowly, like maybe he didn't understand, or maybe he was just calculating what I might know, how far this had already gone. But it was too late for math. The numbers were in. The plan was in motion. And Aubrey? Well, she was about to walk into something she didn't see coming. I woke up the next morning with a strange sense of peace that felt both unnatural and entirely earned, the kind of calm that settles over a battlefield right before the final charge, when you know the chaos is coming, but you've already accepted it, even prepared for it, with a kind of deliberate stillness that makes your heartbeat sound like a war drum in the quiet. The bed beside me was already empty, Jack having slipped out early like he always did after trips, as if avoiding eye contact would somehow erase the lies still clinging to his skin like second-hand perfume. The house was clean. Too clean. The kind of clean you do when you're expecting company, but pretending you're not. I moved through it like I was on rails, methodically setting the table, choosing a wine I knew he hated and she probably wouldn't recognize, folding the linen napkins just right, placing one plate at the head of the table for me and 2 side by side near the middle. Close enough that they'd feel cozy, like they were sitting down for something intimate. I wanted her to feel the illusion just long enough for the rug to be yanked hard and fast from under her. Jack hovered all day like a dog waiting for thunder, pacing from room to room with attention I'd never seen in him before, and I think deep down he knew the game was over, or at least slipping out of his control. He didn't ask about dinner, didn't ask why I was lighting candles, or why I pulled out the good plates we only used on holidays. He just watched and flinched every time I smiled. That's how you know someone feels guilty, not when they confess, but when your kindness feels like punishment. By 5:45, he'd changed his shirt twice, finally settling on a pale blue button-down that he used to wear for date nights with me before those turned into pizza in front of the TV, and even then, only when I reminded him. I sat at the head of the table, legs crossed, wine glass in hand, a slow rhythm to my sips, like time was folding in on itself, and I had all of it to spare. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. He jumped like a man caught in the act, wiping his hands on his pants for no reason, and looked at me with this half-pleading, half-panicked expression that might have once worked on me back when I thought fear meant love. I nodded toward the door. "She's early," I said, and he blinked like the words themselves were foreign. When Aubrey walked in, she floated, like women do when they think they've won something. Tight dress, perfect hair, heels clicking across my hardwood floors like punctuation marks, and that damn purse she always carried, the one he bought her in Vegas after that big client dinner last spring. She walked straight toward him, arms outstretched, voice sugary and practiced, "Hey, babe," and then she saw me. I didn't move, just lifted my glass and said, "Please sit." I opened the good stuff. She looked at Jack, confused, already bristling, and then back at me like I was the problem, like I'd invited myself to her evening. She hesitated, but curiosity won, and she took the chair next to Jack, her body angled slightly away from him now, instincts already kicking in. There was a beat of silence, one of those awkward, heavy ones that you can't slice with words no matter how sharp they are. Then I reached behind me, lifted the framed wedding photo from the sideboard, and set it down gently in the center of the table, facing them. Jack smiled at first, maybe thought I was getting nostalgic, maybe thought this was my sad little attempt to win him back. But then I turned the frame around. The color drained from his face in slow motion. Aubrey leaned forward, eyes narrowing, confusion turning into something else, something harder. She read the top line aloud, voice faltering as she said, "Petitioner, Sarah Caldwell. Respondent, Jack Caldwell." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I leaned in, not too far, just enough to be heard over the sound of their silence, and smiled the way you do when you've waited a long time for someone to stop pretending. "Oh," I said, with a softness that carried its own weight, "you didn't tell her? You're divorced as of last Thursday." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Just that panicked inhale men do when they're caught without a script. Aubrey stared at him like she was waiting for an explanation that wouldn't come, and I saw it hit her, that he hadn't just lied to me, he'd lied to her too. Maybe he promised her a future, maybe he swore he was working on it, maybe he even made her believe I was the villain in a story she didn't write. But now the pages were wide open, and there was no way to edit the truth. She stood slowly, eyes still locked on him, like he might start making sense if she stared hard enough. But he didn't move. He just sat there, breathing like a man underwater, drowning in the silence I left hanging in the air like smoke. She pushed back her chair, didn't even bother picking up her purse, and said, barely above a whisper, "You lied to me?" Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her like a gavel coming down in a courtroom, final and damning and echoing louder than anything I could have screamed. Jack finally turned to me, face hollow, mouth hanging slightly open like maybe he was going to ask a question or issue a plea, but I was already pouring another glass of wine, already moving on to dessert, already past the point where his reaction mattered. Because this wasn't for him. None of it was for him. This was for me. This was for every night I stared at the ceiling wondering what I'd done wrong, for every second I shrank myself to make him feel big, for every lie I swallowed just to keep the peace. And now the storm had passed, and I was still standing. He sat at the edge of the dining room table like a child sent to the principal's office, but instead of offering excuses or asking forgiveness, he just sat there in stunned silence, staring at the hollow space where Aubrey had been. Like if he concentrated hard enough, she might reappear and smooth it all over with one of those saccharine smiles he used to fall for. But I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't ask him why, because by the time he realized what he had lost, I had already stopped wanting it. What was the point of demanding answers from a man who spent years giving them to someone else? There's a quiet kind of power in not reacting, in watching someone unravel while you hold steady, unbothered and unshaken, because they expected chaos and instead got calculation. He sat there waiting for the screaming, the thrown wineglass, the emotional breakdown that would confirm his belief that I was unstable, dramatic, maybe even a little crazy. But I had outgrown the part of me that used to play into that narrative. The fire he was waiting for had already burned through everything I'd once hoped for in this marriage, and all that remained was cold steel and scorched earth. I stood up without a word and walked into the front hall closet, pulling out the small manila envelope I had prepared days ago, the one with a copy of his new lease agreement, a set of keys with a green tag marked Unit 2B, and a letter from the building manager explaining that the utilities were covered through the end of summer. When I returned and placed it in front of him, he looked up with the slow, slack-jawed confusion of someone who can't figure out whether they're being helped or humiliated. "What is this?" he finally asked, his voice more petulant than remorseful, like a man still clinging to the illusion that he deserved gentleness. "It's where you'll be staying," I said, calm and even, "starting tonight." He opened the envelope with trembling fingers, scanned the lease, and then looked up at me with that expression he used to wear when we argued about money, the one that said, "How dare you do this without asking me?" But he didn't say it this time. Maybe because he realized that whatever version of me used to wait for his approval was gone now. Evaporated. Replaced by someone who had no interest in his comfort. "You planned all this?" he asked, a little too slowly, like he was finally catching up to the reality I'd been living in for 3 years. "I did," I said, crossing my arms. "And you signed off on most of it." His brow furrowed in that way it always did when he was about to lie or pretend ignorance. But instead of arguing, I turned and walked to the living room bookshelf, pulling down a slim black binder filled with notarized copies of every major transfer we'd made in the last 6 months. I dropped it on the table in front of him with a dull thud. He opened it and found the page that showed the beach house, our beach house, the one his parents left him in their will, had been signed over to me 2 weeks ago. "You tricked me," he muttered, but it came out like a whimper. "No," I said. "You just stopped paying attention." He stared at the document like it had personally betrayed him, and I watched the slow realization spread across his face that every decision he made while distracted by another woman had consequences he never bothered to consider. That while he was off playing out his teenage fantasy with a 30-something woman who thought she could rebuild a man from scratch, I was carving him out of my life piece by piece, name by name, asset by asset. Later that week, I sat across from Sharon in her corner office downtown, signing the last few documents to make it official. She slid me a glass of decent whiskey and clinked her own against mine without ceremony. "Congratulations," she said, not smiling, but nodding with respect. "You didn't just divorce him. You dismantled the son of a bitch." I didn't say much. I didn't need to. She knew, and I knew, and the empty ring finger on my left hand felt lighter than it had in years. The night after it was all finalized, I went back to the same restaurant where it all began, the one with the overpriced duck and the candles that flickered like nervous hearts. I booked a table for one and wore the navy blue dress Jack always said made me look too serious. I liked how it made me feel sharp, like glass in the moonlight. I ordered the same wine we had shared that night, but this time, I drank it slowly, savoring the taste of something that was mine again. The waiter looked confused when I didn't order a second entree, and I just smiled and said, "He's not coming," with a calm that made him blink and stammer an apology. I sat there alone, not lonely, watching the couples around me lean in close and lie to each other with soft voices and fake laughs, and I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude that I was no longer performing that particular play. When dessert came, I raised my fork in a small, silent toast to no one in particular and whispered under my breath, "Here's to no longer being a placeholder." It could have ended there, clean and poetic, but life loves a final twist. As I stood up to leave, sliding my phone out to request a ride, the screen lit up with a name I hadn't expected to see again. Aubrey. The message was short. No emojis. No punctuation. Just words. "I think we should talk." He lied to me too. I stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering over the screen, considering whether I owed her even a sliver of acknowledgement. But then I remembered the way she had walked into my home without a second of hesitation, the way she had smiled at Jack like I wasn't even there. And I thought, no, that chapter's closed too. So I hit delete. Then I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks in a sentence only I got to write.